Welcome to After the Letter, our short companion conversation following this week's reading of The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. In these conversations, one of us has just narrated the letter, while the other is hearing it for the first time. Together we explore what stood out, what surprised us, and why Lewis's observations still resonate today. This week we're looking at letter 5 of the Screwtape Letters, which turns to fear, uncertainty, and the way difficult circumstances can reveal what matters most to us. This letter invites us to consider the question, why can the same crisis bring out both the worst and the best in people?
So what surprised me was, I thought it was going to end up being about war, and I thought Wormwood was going to be all jolly about there being a breakout of war and calamity and mayhem. It ended up not being about that, so I got a bit confused.
I remember when the first time that I read that, I was expecting something similar, that somehow the war would be seen by them as a good thing.
I thought there would be more politics, but again, I suppose if you're writing a story that will stand the test of time, if it ends up being too specific, then you can miss the point. But I understand that Lewis was writing this around about the time of the Second World War. What it seems to do is give the opportunity to think about what happens in time of crisis, war being an example.
Screwtape is mentoring Wormwood, so Screwtape doesn't want Wormwood to get all caught up in the bigness of the war. He just wants him to focus on his patient. He wants him to do his job. And the job doesn't change. If there's a war or if there isn't a war, the tempting goes on.
So one of the interesting things was when something bad happens in the environment, that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to spiral into a negative kind of thought space.
Yeah, it's not necessarily going to be any better from a tempter's point of view, because the tempter is wanting each human soul to be concerned with the things that the tempters want them to be concerned with, and the war will lift them out of that and thinking into something beyond themselves, something greater than themselves, and the tempters don't want them to do that.
Yeah, so now that you're saying this, I'm reflecting on what I heard at the beginning, which was, in my mind's eye, Wormwood is drunk with perceived triumph because, there's a war on and the patient is worried about it and is potentially panicking, and maybe they can feed off that energy. However, the more experienced tempter is saying, look out, it doesn't always go like that, because sometimes it can bring out, from the tempter's perspective, the worst in a human being, whereas us as human beings, we would say it might bring the best out.
Yeah, well, we're not thinking about ourselves, we're thinking about other people. Yeah,
so sacrifice and peril and all of those things, and putting ourselves in jeopardy like firefighters and things like that. The whole idea is it can bring out the heroic in us, and that can be a big problem for the likes of tempters such as Screwtape and Wormwood. Life does end. Life and death are real things. In this context, what did you get out of this letter?
Death represents fear to us, but death is really a transition. It's not something to be fearful about. And I think the tempters would prefer that we were fearful, because the fear closes us down. And the tempters are keen on this. So Screwtape says to Wormwood, don't expect too much from this war. How much better it would be if everybody died in costly nursing homes.
Knowing that there is something big and unknown coming is an opportunity to see things a lot clearer in terms of what actually matters. Every day worries in letters 1 to 4, the quibbles with the mother and the people in church, those are kind of niggling things, but now we're talking about something much bigger. And I almost wonder whether the patient might even start to think back and start appreciating those moments in church, or those annoying moments with the mother, in comparison to the prospect of what's to come. Maybe they'll get drafted, who knows? But maybe it's an opportunity to kind of live a little bit more mindfully and intentionally.
Yeah, for sure.
I suppose that kind of moves on to what's going on in one person's head and what's going on in their own lives to what's going on around them, so their wider community and sort of society as a whole. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Well, yeah, hardship can bring people together. The tempters don't want people to realise true compassion between each other, because compassion means doing what is right for somebody else out of love. And it's not like a soppy love. It's true compassion, like a parent chastising their child for trying to run across a road. It's for their benefit that they don't get splattered by a car. That's a definitively compassionate position. You do something for somebody else because it's the right thing to do. The tempters would teach us that we should look after ourselves and that our own fears are more important than doing the right thing for somebody else.
I heard the thing of, will somebody be a pacifist or will they, I can't remember what the alternative was. Patriot. And I don't think that either of those things are weak things.
They are polarised positions. We're seeing a lot of that in our society, where people are being polarised into different factions. Social media picks up on the things that people have as a weakness and exacerbates it. Bot farms specifically pick divisions between people in order to exacerbate them and polarise society. I don't want to align social media necessarily with the ambitions of the tempters, but it's interesting that the internet can sometimes reflect our basest fears, and that those fears can seek to destabilise and divide us at a time when anybody who understands themselves a little better understands that we need to be coming together compassionately.
Yeah. Sometimes I find it difficult to watch sports because in my head I sometimes see that extremely tribal aspect of there's one side and the other. If we looked into antiquity, the idea was rather than going to war, you pick your champion and the champions go in, they duke it out in whatever way. And we still have that in our society, but we seem to have forgotten that, and then we get acted upon.
Yes.
And we also get distracted by it. So rather than it being something that was cathartic, rather than it being a way of letting that pressure valve go in a structured way, in a contained way, now I feel a lot of what goes on isn't to help us regulate our feelings about difference. Now it's become so entertaining that we don't even realise that we don't see each other. How can we figure stuff out in these difficult times when we start to just hear news reports, or we just see a group of people, or we just see a flag, and we just forget that actually we're all human beings? Yes, we may have different perspectives.
Yeah, but those perspectives do not outweigh the fact of our existence.
Yeah. I think we have talked a lot about what's going on now. You know, you talked about news and constant global events. And you also talked about sort of doing things compassionately for others, like neighbours and communities.
I think that's got to come to the fore, and I think that the concept of a high street, a local perspective, will be on the increase as more people realise how much we're being manipulated by the people who purport to lead us. They're clearly window dressing for things that are going on behind the scenes. Because we know, for instance, that most global conflicts which are going on now are about resources. They're never about the things that they say they're about in the news. And our politicians never seem to be able to tell the truth about these things, which is why I think people are turning to other people just in order to get some stability back, some human connection back.
I agree. I think the idea is to figure out how to stay humane, finding that inner courage and having faith and hope, because those seem to be the things that are being stamped out through the fear-mongering.
Yes, and just to bring it back to the letter, all of those things that you just mentioned represent the erosion of the virtues. One of the main roles of the tempters is to erode virtues from the human, whereas the enemy that Screwtape talks about desires that the humans will promote the virtues in their own lives, because that's the way that they get back to him.
Or whoever. So, what's next?
Letter 6.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of After the Letter. If you haven't yet listened to Letter 5 itself, you'll find it in our main playlist. Next Sunday, we'll continue with Letter 6, which begins to explore what happens when our imagination starts living in tomorrow instead of today. This will be followed later in the week by another conversation as we explore the themes together. Until then, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What quality do you think matters most when life becomes uncertain?